Are you missing out on one of the most cost-effective ways to market your architecture practice? I'm joined by copywriter Ellie Senior to discover the benefits of PR. We'll cover everything from how to find the right publications to target, what content is newsworthy, and how to write an eye-catching, engaging press release. In this episode of Architecture Business Club, a weekly podcast for small firm founders who want to build their dream business in architecture and enjoy more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment in what they do. I'm John Clayton, your host. I know that building an architecture business can feel hard, especially if you're a sole practitioner. The good news is that you don't have to do it alone. In 2024, we launched our membership community to a small group of founding members, including architects, architectural technologists, and interior designers. We meet online each week and occasionally in person to support each other in building our businesses and to have some fun along the way. In 2025, we're opening the doors to a limited number of new members. And if you'd like to join this supportive group of like-minded professionals, now's your chance. Just go to architecturebusinessclub.com/waitlist or click the link in the show notes and enter your details so we can let you know when and how you can join this incredible group. And if you have any questions, just email John, that's Jon, at architecturebusinessclub.com. Now let's discuss how you can get started with PR. Ellie Senior is a creative freelance copywriter specialising in authentic storytelling for small independent businesses. Through websites, case studies, award submissions, press releases and more, Ellie has helped many architecture practices communicate more effectively with potential clients, leaving them to focus on the design work. Ellie writes regularly for the KL Home Design and Build magazine, showcasing talented architects, developers, designers and tradesmen through detailed features and advertorials. For those looking to connect, she can be found posting regularly on LinkedIn, where her timely tips on all things content are popular with many in the construction industry. Ellie, welcome to Architecture Business Club.
It's a pleasure, John. Thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's great to have you here. Ellie, I know that we've got a shared love of water sports. Not at the moment for me. I must admit, confess, I'm a bit more of a seasonal kayaker, but I do enjoy going kayaking on the rivers near where I live in Norfolk. But you're into some water sports as well. Do you want to tell me about the stuff that you like to do?
Yeah, so for me, it's all about the boards. I think my first love is windsurfing, which is, if you imagine, like a surfboard but with a sail, so you don't have to do the paddling bit. So I love that. I think it's so exhilarating. And especially now as an adult, I think there's so little opportunity to kind of scare yourself a bit, excite yourself a bit, in day-to-day life. So windsurfing really fills that for me and distracts me from the day-to-day. And then if it's not windy, I love to get out on the river too, but on a paddleboard. It really gives me that space to just relax and get a bit of exercise as well.
Oh, that's cool. I love it. It's so peaceful out on the river. How difficult is it to actually, as a newbie, to stand up on a board? Like, is it quite difficult to do?
I think it is a bit challenging if you're not used to anything like that to start with. We always recommend people sort of kneel to begin with. So on your knees, and when you're comfortable, get up on your feet. But having said that, my mum and dad, who are in their 70s now, they both quite recently took up paddleboarding for the first time. And they managed to do a whole session without falling in. So I think if they can do it, I'm sure anyone can take it up.
Oh, that's amazing. So cool. You can have like family outings now, can't you? With everybody
lovely.
Out on the boards.
Yeah, we take my little daughter and son as well. And we're all out there on the river.
Oh, nice. So Ellie, we're going to talk about PR. So that's public relations if people aren't familiar with what the acronym actually means. But I think pretty much everybody's probably heard of people use that phrase PR. And we're going to talk about so that architecture practices can get started with PR. So, first of all, what would you say are some of the common misconceptions about PR?
It's a good start. Yeah, I think a lot of small business owners, and that's in architecture, and across the board, think that PR is something that big businesses do. Someone who's got their own marketing department and communications department, do this thing called PR. But actually, it's really totally achievable for businesses of any size. At the most basic level, it's just about getting your practice into a magazine or a newspaper and sharing what you do. And I think actually architecture is really well suited to that because it's such a visual service. At the end of a project, you've got these stunning buildings to show off that people want to see, and lots of people get excited about architecture. So I think PR can be a really great way to market your business, no matter what size your business is.
I love that. So this is something that if anyone's got any preconceived ideas that this is just for bigger businesses and for bigger practices, that we've quashed that. This is something that is for everybody. It doesn't matter what size of business, that everybody can benefit from PR and, should be thinking about this as part of their marketing. So can we dig in a little bit more and talk about some of the benefits that PR can bring?
Yeah, there's so many benefits, John. I think it's a really cost-effective form of marketing because literally for the price of putting together a press release, and you can do that in-house or you can pay somebody to do it, you can potentially be reaching out to a whole new audience, and that might be a local audience or that might be a national audience. So there are lots of benefits. I think the first one is what we'd say, increased exposure. So that's about more people knowing you exist and knowing exactly what it is you do. And coverage in a magazine or newspaper is great for that because there's lots of people that won't have heard of you before that might be reading that publication because they enjoy what that publication is all about. And then depending on the magazine or newspaper that you choose to target, if that's a well-respected publication and people think that that's, a magazine or newspaper that they think has really good advice and has got sound knowledge behind it, then you being associated with that gives you that external credibility as well. So, for example, if we think of, there's a magazine called Self-Build and Design magazine, that's aimed at people who are interested in self-building. I think if you've got a person, for example, who reads that on a monthly basis and gets really great tips from it and enjoys it, then if your practice pops up on those pages, then that person's going to assume that you also have that high level of expertise that they've come to expect from that magazine. So it's great for that too. And then there's kind of more basic kind of simple benefits, which is that every time your practice name pops up on the pages of anything, whether that's online or print materials, then you're putting yourself front of people's mind. So when they do need an architecture service, or perhaps they hear of a friend or a colleague who wants a recommendation, then hopefully you are the one that they think of first. And it will drive traffic to your business through your website, through your social media, whatever it is. But that kind of magazine or newspaper coverage can be the starting point for lots of other interest in your business and your marketing.
Wow, there's quite a lot of benefits there, isn't there? So it's a great way to be more visible. It's a cost-effective form of marketing. You mentioned about the benefit that if it's in a publication, that by association it can help to build your credibility and your reputation. If it's in a good publication, just by being featured in that can help with your credibility and authority in the industry. So that's really cool as well.
Yeah.
And as you say, that this is something that can open up doors to other opportunities as well. Yeah, I think this is something that we should definitely all be considering. If we're in the business of architecture and we're not doing PR already, this is definitely something that we should be looking into. How do we find the right publications to target? Because if we've not done this before, where do we even kind of start with this? So thinking about what are the right publications and how do we go about finding them?
Yeah, and it's definitely worth putting some thought into that. You want to make sure that you're associating yourself with publications that you respect and that you think, you have some sort of synergy with. I think a great starting point is to think about your local press, so your local newspapers, any local magazines that are around your area, because you'll know those well. And also for a lot of small practices, I'm sure most of your client base, ideally you want to be in the area that you work confidently within, the local authorities and planning authorities that you feel comfortable with. So for where I'm based, for example, in the Cambridge area, we have a local newspaper, the Cambridge Independent, which is really well respected. And I think it has a readership of around 9,000 people every week. So, that's not to be sniffed at, is it? That's 9,000 people you could be reaching out to just by getting your name in that newspaper. We also in Cambridge have a local magazine called Velvet Magazine, which has some really high quality features, lovely photography. And that's distributed free across the city in lots of businesses, cafes, hairdressers, etc., where people are kind of sitting and flicking through, I'm sure. And that gets a readership of around 35,000 people. On a monthly basis. So, that's a massive audience that potentially could be interested in what you're doing. So I'm sure, in whatever area that you're based, there will be kind of equivalents to those.
It's a really good point, actually, the fact that this is, particularly if you're looking to target local publications, that it is geographically very targeted, as opposed to, say, something like, well, if you're just sort of posting on your social media accounts, I will caveat that to say that if you are doing paid social media campaigns like Facebook ads, you can target more geographically. But if you're just sort of spitting content out there online, that it's not necessarily getting in front of the people in the right location. Whereas if it's a local publication, like a local newspaper or a local magazine, then potentially this is really kind of laser targeting the people that you want to connect with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sort of following on from that, actually, John, I think another category that I'd recommend is those more national but industry specific magazines, architecture magazines. Because if you reach out to the people that are reading those sorts of magazines, they're people who are already engaged with architecture for some reason. So nobody's picking up a magazine about self-building if they've not probably got a dream to self-build one day. And so if you can be the person that they find when they open up those pages, then that's really valuable because you're catching them at the right point, in their kind of interests. And I think architecture particularly has a great opportunity in those kind of magazines because people love architecture, the kind of eye candy of looking at the latest beautiful building or home that we all aspire to. So there's lots of really popular magazines in that space. I'm sure, your listeners will know loads of them, but I'm thinking about ones like Grand Designs or Home and Gardens, let's say, Ideal Home, that kind of thing, or the more specific ones like Build It.
Home building and renovating,
yes,
Build It.
Yeah. So there's loads in that space. And those magazines are always looking for content. They want to hear about your showcase project that you've worked on. So don't forget to reach out to them, when you've completed something really great that you're proud of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously, people do love this stuff because, we wouldn't have all those magazines on the shelf and we wouldn't have that many architecture and property development TV programs if there wasn't an appetite from the public to learn about this stuff and to get inspired by other people's projects and stories around architecture and building. There's definitely some opportunities there. And the fact you mentioned there that these publications are often always on the lookout for new material to put in the magazine, then that's a real opportunity for those practices that choose to do some PR and reach out to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you've mentioned there actually, TV shows as well. This is perhaps a little bit harder to get yourself into, but if you are confident enough talking on TV or radio as well, that's another area that you can target. I've talked a lot here about magazines and newspapers because that's kind of the more run-of-the-mill kind of PR. But if you feel confident public speaking, you don't mind being on camera, then those sorts of opportunities could be really amazing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that could be quite incredible. Ellie, could you share some ideas on what type of content is newsworthy enough for a press release? Because I think that might be something that people are thinking, this all sounds great, but little old me with my small architecture practice or the sole practitioner, what have I got to talk about that's newsworthy enough for a press release? So could we talk a little bit about that, about what content ideas we could run with a press release and what sort of things are newsworthy enough that maybe we might be thinking, aren't good enough for a press release.
Yeah, I think I'm really glad you brought that up, John, because I think this is one of the barriers that stops people putting out a press release. I think they think, well, I haven't really got anything to talk about. But it's just not true. There's lots of great content that you're doing every day that you think is a bit boring probably, but other people would be really interested in. Journalists are looking for stories. So I think the one thing to watch out for is what you don't want to do is just send them your usual marketing spiel. They want to know something that's going to interest their readers and entertain their readers, engage their readers. So you've got to make sure that you find that newsworthy angle. And that's about showing how your business is great rather than telling that your business is great. So when I'm talking to my clients about newsworthy content, I have what I call my 6 fail-safe categories. So I'll run you through those if you like. Yeah. So the first one is a noteworthy achievement. And this one hopefully is quite obvious, but we're talking here about, if you've won an award for one of your projects, or even if you've just been shortlisted for an award, that's a great achievement too. Or if you've been working on a project that's particularly prestigious in some way, it might be a building that's had a lot of interest locally or nationally, or is in a location that's had a lot of interest. Those are the sorts of things where if any of those apply, you should definitely be sending a press release out. That should be part of that process. So that's number one. The second category is sharing some sort of inspiring journey. If you think about the story arc of any fiction book, the main character always goes on some sort of journey. They start off from whatever their starting point is. They're flawed in some way. They have this great climax where they face some kind of challenge and overcome it. And then at the end of the story, everyone has a happy ending. Journalists love that kind of thing too. We all do. So in architecture, I think the arc of a project actually really lends itself to that. Think about sharing a project from that very first conception, what the brief was that your client brought to you, right to the completion, and share all those challenges that were faced along the way and use those to demonstrate how you as an architect managed to overcome those on behalf of your client. That's a great story. And if you've got some great images of the finished building and you pair that with that story, then that can be a really good, strong press release to put out. The third category is forming a real strong human connection. So this is a great opportunity if you're someone who doesn't really like being the centre of attention. So if you're an architect, you want a bit of press for your business, but you don't really want to be the one that everybody's looking at. This is a great way to use your client. So if you think you've got a client who just loves talking about their build and the project that they've done, their dream house that they've created, then you can put them in the position of the star of the show and ask them if they'd be happy for you to share their story. I've got an example of this one actually fairly recently that I put out on behalf of a PIP architect who are based in Cambridge, and they had a self-build that they worked on that's called the Hay Barn in a small village in Cambridgeshire, and the project's really striking. The architect is really proud of the finished result. It's got this kind of minimalist agricultural look, and then inside it's got lots of fitted joinery and a kind of bare plywood, so it's quite unusual, I think. And so they wanted to share this, and the clients were happy to talk about it because it was their passion. So I did an interview on behalf of PIP with their client and then wrote it up and sent it off, and we got it picked up by 3 separate magazines, just one project. So that was a really great example of what you can do with just a normal project for you. Number 4, category 4, is a local link. So if you're targeting a local newspaper or magazine, they love stories that are really strongly based in the location where their readership is. So this it's worth thinking here about stuff outside of your everyday service, perhaps. So I know a lot of small practices are actually quite involved in their local communities. If you support a local charity perhaps, or you sponsor your local sports team, or anything along those kind of lines, that's something that you definitely ought to be sharing too. People love hearing about that. I worked with a construction firm near here called RSC. They sponsored the local beer festival. So we did a press release that was mostly about the beer festival, but we used it to kind of show the core values that business has of being friendly and family run and, you know, rooted in the community. And that was a really good story that got picked up.
I love that.
And then the fifth one is timely news. So it's easy to forget that newspapers are actually all about news, like it is in the title, but they like stuff that's just happened. So I think if you've just launched something new, or perhaps you've done like a big grand opening for a building that you've been involved in, you know, that stuff you want to get out to the press as quickly as possible. You know, they're not going to be interested in it the month after it happened, but if you can tell them literally the week it's happening, then you might get a little, you know, a few inches of column in the local newspaper for that. So that's a good one too. And then the final one is tips and advice. So this is one that's good if none of the others apply. So if you can't really think of anything to fit in the other categories, I know that every architect, designer, you know, listening out there has got lots of great expertise that they could be sharing that's really valuable. So I think if you sit back and you think, if you were talking to an individual client and giving them advice, what are the things that you'd be telling them? What professional experience do you have that would be really valuable to them and that they could apply themselves at home? And I think the key to this one is making it quite specific. So, you know, what you think of as boring and kind of everyday actually could be a real light bulb moment for someone who doesn't work in architecture all of the time. An example of this actually is I worked with a landscape architect, Tim Jennings. He's again in the Cambridgeshire area, and he got a lovely double page spread in Velvet magazine that I mentioned earlier, just sharing his advice on how to design a garden that really fits your personality. So something that's a bit more individualistic than like the run-of-mill advice people might be able to find online. So, you know, literally anyone could do that category any time that you think your business could do with a little bit of a PR boost.
There's 6 absolutely brilliant ideas there, Ellie. If we'd just done that bit for the whole episode, that would have, on its own, would have been super valuable. Then we've got all these other bits that we're able to talk about too. So,
and, you know, we could go into detail a lot more on all of those too. But I think as sort of starting points to think about, you know, that's a good, if you've never done PR before, that's a great place to start. Sit down and think about those categories and how you might fit into one or more of those.
I love that. So that leads nicely into my next question that I had for you, which is around tips for newbies. So for anybody that has never released or written a press release before, do you have any tips specifically for newbies on writing a press release? Remember, don't forget to join the waitlist for our membership community, where you can meet other business owners who want the same thing as you. A thriving business that gives you more freedom, flexibility and fulfillment. Just go to architecturebusinessclub.com/waitlist or click the link in the show notes and enter your details so you don't miss out on this amazing opportunity to improve your business and your life. And if you're enjoying the show, then please leave a 5-star review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Now back to the show.
Yeah, now that's the real big topic, I think, is the writing the press release bit. Well, let's start from thinking about what the purpose of a press release is, right? So the purpose is to grab the attention of a journalist. And if you go back in history, then every local paper would have had a whole army of reporters. And all you needed to do was kind of give them the detail of what your story was and a bit of a headline, and they might come out and write a story all about you. But the truth is that these days, you know, newspapers and magazines are really understaffed in general. So my experience of sending out press releases is that the most successful way to get that coverage is to write a press release that can pretty much be copied and pasted straight into a publication. You know, write the article for them, basically. So as a kind of overview of how to do that, let's start from the top. You know, you're going to need a headline. And the headline is probably the most important line you can write, because if you don't grab their attention from the start, then nobody's going to read the rest of it anyway. So you want to keep it quite short and snappy, but you want there to be enough intrigue in there to grab the attention of the journalist. So you want to get kind of the essence of what your story is about into there. So if it's about a self-build, then make sure the word self-build are in the title, you know, that kind of thing. Then moving on. Oh, and also actually the important thing about a headline is we're usually sending press releases out by email these days. So that headline will also form the subject line of your email. So its job is to kind of get the journalist to open the email in the first place, which also makes it kind of doubly important. Then the first paragraph of your actual press release should have in it what we call the 5 W's. And I'm taking you back to school here, probably, John. I wonder if you can remember. What would your English teacher have told you?
Can I remember? Yeah. Was it like what, where, why, when,
who?
Who?
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly, yeah. So in this instance, we're talking about who is the story about? So kind of introduce the client, probably, in many cases. What the news is to tell. So what is the building or project that you're talking about? Where it is, when it got built, when it got completed, when it started, that kind of thing. And then most crucially, probably, why it's interesting. So in that first paragraph, try and make sure you've got in brief all of those 5 things. Because again, we're back to that theory of if people are grabbed by that first paragraph, they're going to then read on and read the rest of the detail that you've put in there. Which then brings me on to the rest. And then the rest of your press release wants to be sharing the specifics of the story. And as humans, we just love detail. And I think one of the mistakes people often make when they're writing a press release is they only put the bare minimum in there, the kind of facts. But actually, we want the detail behind the story. So put the mundane in there. Tell us exactly what materials the building was built out of. Tell us why you put those windows in that particular orientation and the benefits of that. Tell us the stages that you went through, the problems that occurred and how you overcame them. All of those things are the kind of meat that actually gets people interested in reading about what your story is. And then alongside that, facts and figures can be really powerful to put in there as well. Percentages, totals, quantities, like these all sound quite impressive if you use them in the right places. And don't round them either. That's a kind of real key tip. If you think about it, if I was to say, I'm thinking totally off the top of my head, but, the refurbishment reduced carbon emissions by 23%. That sounds more impressive than saying we reduced carbon emissions by around 20%. So really be specific there. And then towards the end of your press release, you want to include at least one quote from an actual person. So again, journalists love to be able to quote a direct source. And if you hand that to them really easily, then it makes the story much more attractive to them to put in the publication. So that could be getting the thoughts and opinions of your client, or perhaps, some of the other consultants that worked on the project with you. Or it can just be a quote from you. If you're the architect, then actually you're the person that people want to hear from. So although that feels a bit weird if you're writing the press release yourself, don't be afraid to quote yourself. And then the final thing, and this is the bit that perhaps is easy to forget, but is most important to you if you're doing this as a marketing exercise, is to finish with a call to action. And I know, John, that lots of your other guests have talked about the importance of a call to action in lots of marketing content, but it definitely applies here too. That last little paragraph at the end is your opportunity to do the kind of marketing-y bit of a press release. Make it really clear what the takeaway is for the reader. So do you want them to end up going to have a look on your website, for example? That's probably the most obvious one. Or is there an event that you want them to attend, maybe? Whatever it is, make it really simple and clear, and only put one. So it can be tempting to perhaps also put in your social media handles and, all these other things. But if you only give people one choice, then they tend to follow it more readily than if you give them lots of things, and then we get a bit overwhelmed as a reader. And then the final line that you write wants to speak directly to the journalist. So you want to actually tell them, how to get in touch with you if they want high resolution photos, perhaps, or more information about the project. So make sure that you include how they should get in touch with you right at the end.
That's brilliant. You've given us a whole framework there to be able to write a press release. That's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Really good. Really useful.
Hopefully helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So what else do we need to consider, though, when we're putting together this press release? Are there any other things that we need to think about?
Yeah, I guess there's the more practical side of actually sending out the press release. in a modern world, obviously we're going to be sending it by email. But I think whenever I send out press releases, I always actually use the platform MailChimp, which a lot of people use for emails to clients, like a mailing list. But I find that a really great tool because it means that you can design the email as well. And, journalists are the same as everybody else. If you just give them a block of text in a regular email, that's not nearly as compelling as if you've got some great photos and, a layout that looks engaging. So think about how you actually visually present your press release as well as the actual written content that's in there. And if you don't have MailChimp, there are lots of other alternatives to that, or you can do some of that kind of formatting stuff within your normal email provider as well, I'm sure. The other thing I love about MailChimp, though, actually, is that you can also track who's opening your emails, and that can be really helpful information. So I'll send out the same press release to a number of different press outlets that I think might pick it up, and then I can track who's opened it, who's clicked to find out more, and that helps me know where to put my energy, where to follow up. So that's a really good tool. And then that's another point really is the following up. So the other bit that I think a lot of people don't do to begin with when they're first starting to do this is follow up after that initial email. So if you've sent out a press release and after a week you haven't heard anything, don't just give up. It might be that journalist just had a super busy inbox that day and it got passed by. I always follow up with another email saying, in a really friendly way, I don't know if you spotted this, here's this press release I sent out last week, and I reattach the original press release. I give them a little line that hopefully interests them, this is a great project because of X, Y, and Z. And then that's a second stab at getting them their interest. And the amount of times actually that I've had journalists come back to me after that point and say, oh yeah, I totally missed this first time, but this looks great, and it's ended up being used. And then after that second follow-up, I will send a second follow-up, a third email. And in that third one, I'll normally write something like, I know you're very busy, if you've seen this and you're not interested, just to let you know, I won't be contacting you again. But if you would like to get in touch, then that would be great. And then it means that you're not bombarding them, but you are giving them the opportunity to come back to you, and, you're giving it your very best shot. And I think a lot of people are scared to do that, but, don't be, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Sometimes people are a bit uncomfortable thinking like, oh, am I being a bit pushy? But if you look at it that you're helping them out, that these publications are looking for engaging and interesting stories to print, and they may have genuinely just missed your email. So it is worth doing the follow-up. So the other thing you mentioned there was about using an email service provider. You mentioned about using MailChimp.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of other alternatives out there. I'll also give a shout out to MailerLite, which is another one that has a really generous free plan. So that's a really good starting point if you've not used any sort of email marketing software before. Interestingly, I have done a few press releases over the years, and I've never thought to do it from my email marketing software. But actually, that's such a really great idea to do that. And it's just, I've already have that software set up anyway. So that would be something quick and easy for me to do that would help me to track open rates and to see who's receiving and opening those emails. So I'm definitely going to do that for my next press release.
It's definitely a helpful tool.
Ellie, I had another question actually, just on regarding the emailing of the press release. Does it matter whether we send the text, the actual body of the press release, as a document attached to an email, or would you recommend that we put all of the text in the body of the email itself? Is there any benefits or pros and cons either way, or does it not matter?
I think that's a really great question. Yeah, I would definitely recommend putting it in the body. So I think, again, if we're going back to the point that these journalists are often getting a lot of content, especially if you're targeting a publication that's very popular. So putting it into the body means that it's just one less click away for them to see what you're talking about. And if we go back to that kind of opening paragraph where you're including your 5 Ws, if they can see that without having to have clicked one more click, then it's much more likely to get picked up, I think. So yes, again, which is another great reason to use your mail software like MailChimp or MailerLite, because you can easily do that and still make it look attractive. And actually that reminds me of another point, John, which is about photos. So I would make sure that, especially for architecture, because it's such a visual thing, that you are putting lots of photos within that press release too, different angles, internal shots, external shots. And within the email, you're going to want those to be of a sensible image size so that it doesn't prevent that email from sending effectively. But you need to make sure that you've also got the high resolution version of all of those available, because what I've found is that, the journalists will get back in touch with you and say, can I have the high res images? And you want to be able to send those quickly because you don't know when their print deadline is going to be.
Is it worth, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer this question or not, but I'll ask it anyway. If you're going to share those high-res images, there's a couple of options there. It could either be a line in the email that just says, if you'd like high-resolution images, let us know and we'll email you back. Or it could be that you put a link in the body of the email to something like a Dropbox folder or Google Drive folder. The only thing I wasn't sure about, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, is if that can affect deliverability of the email if we start putting links in. I don't think it should make any difference, but I'm not an email marketing expert, so I'm not too sure.
No, I mean, I wouldn't want to give a definitive answer either, but I don't think that links make a difference with emails. Certainly on some social media they can do, can't they? But I don't believe that's true with email. Certainly it seems like a real simple and easy way to give, the journalists access to all those beautiful photos that you've got. So it's probably a good idea to try it out. Definitely.
Yeah. I think that might be worth testing because, again, thinking about how time poor some of these journalists are going to be and removing the friction that actually if we're sending the email with a few lower resolution images in the body of the email, and we've also got the press release text in the body of the email, not as an attachment. And then we've just got a little link there for them if they're like, oh, this actually is a really great story, we want this. They've got a little link there. They can immediately go ahead and get those high-res images without then having to spend time going back and forth with further emails. That might be another little time saver for them that helps you increase your chances of getting it published, maybe. So,
yeah,
food for thought. Okay, Ellie. So we've got our press release written and we've got it all drafted out on our email. Is there anything else that we ideally should have in place from a marketing point of view for a successful press release?
Yes. I think it's worth thinking about your whole marketing channel, really. If you send out a press release and it does get picked up and you get a bit of coverage, what you want to make sure is that the reader that sees that article and is interested and wants to find out more has got somewhere to go. So the first point, I think, is to make sure that when they look you up online, you've got some quality things for them to look at. So start with your website, make sure your website is really strong. And I think you've probably had an episode on websites, have you, John?
Yes, we have had an episode on websites with Fabio Zammit a couple of months ago, I think.
Perfect. So, making sure that your homepage is really optimized. I'd also recommend making sure you've got some really great case studies on your website. If someone's found you because they've read about a great project that you've done in a magazine, then they're probably going to want to click through to your website to find some more and see what more you've been doing. So make sure that they can find what they're looking for. And then also beyond that, you want to think about your marketing funnel. So, press coverage would be at the top of what we call the marketing funnel. You're catching lots of people who are showing some interest but are not really ready to actually book and work with you just yet. So think about their journey. If they're at the top of your funnel, how are you going to get them to the bottom? How are you going to get them to the point of actually, spending money with you and on your services? So it might be that you need to think about your social media presence, for example, making sure that you can get them signed up to that so that they're then going to see information from you on a regular basis. You might want a mailing list. So you might want to think about using MailerLite or MailChimp to send out monthly emails to a list of subscribers who have shown interest in you. Perhaps a blog page of some sort on your website so that you can keep up to date with, good advice that people might find interesting. These are all kind of little touch points that mean that over time, they'll get to the point, hopefully, of actually wanting to work with you.
That's great advice. Yeah. Yeah. That might be something that we cover actually on a different episode in the future, perhaps, talking a little bit more about marketing funnels.
Yeah.
Ellie, there was another question that I had, something that I mentioned in the introduction. You help architects and developers and designers with. One of those things is advertorials. Can you just explain what an advertorial is and where they fit into things?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of people find that quite confusing because it is, isn't it? But an advertorial is literally, as the name describes, so it's an advert, but in an editorial style. So if you think about, your conventional advert in a magazine, that can be a great tool. It gets your name in front of lots of people and you can sort of have some bullet points and some photos in there, perhaps, that share what you do. But that's as far as it goes. So an advertorial is a nice kind of bridge between that simple advert and some really detailed editorial content. An advertorial allows you to tell the story behind a project, for example, or behind your company, and get it printed. The key difference between an advertorial and sending out a press release is that you pay for an advertorial. So that's a paid service. You pay the magazine or the newspaper and they publish a page, let's say, all about you. And some of the benefits of that are that you are in complete control. So because you're paying for that content, the magazine or newspaper can't publish anything that you're not completely happy with. So you can have all the final decisions on the design of the page, the content that goes in the actual editorial, the write-up. And so you can make sure it says exactly what you want it to say. The downside, of course, is that it's a bit more expensive. So sending out a press release, can be free if you're putting it together yourself, or by paying someone else to do it, that the fee is fairly nominal compared to actually an advertorial, which, depending on the publication, can be, anything from probably a couple of £100 up to, £1,000 or more. So I think they can be a really effective marketing tool if you've got the budget to put into that. And a press release can be a great way of getting a similar kind of benefits without having to have that outlay necessarily. The other thing I would say about advertorials, which is important, I think, is that they work best if you do it more than once. So just paying to have an advertorial put into a publication on one occasion is going to have kind of a minimal effect, I would say. My experience of working with magazines on this kind of material is that if you sign up to do that on a monthly basis over a long period of time, then that's when you see results. And that's true with any marketing, really. I think repetition is key. You want to be putting out those strong messages, the same messages, month after month, and then the readers will see that, and over time they'll get to the point of like, okay, actually I want to take this further, I want to find out more about what this architect does. That's a bit of a rundown.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks for explaining that. That's it's given us a really clear definition of that. Brilliant. Ellie, we're going to try and wrap things up now. So what would be the main thing that you'd like everyone to take away from the conversation we've had today?
I think the key message is don't be afraid to give it a go. If you've never sent out a press release before, perhaps make January or February, the month that you decide to do that. Won't be successful every time. When you send out a press release, sometimes you won't get anything back and it won't get any publication, but it doesn't have to go to waste. I think the other thing is that you can always repurpose that content. If you've put the effort into writing a press release, you can change that into a series of social media posts, or you can put it on your website, perhaps as a news item. Or send it out as an email to your mailing list if you've created a mailing list. So that material and that time is never wasted. But by sending it out to, a series of publications, you've only got to get picked up by one, and that can be a really big boost for your business. So give it a go. And if you don't succeed the first time, wait a couple of months and have another go with a slightly different angle. And I guarantee, over time, you will get some coverage, especially in the field of architecture, I think, which is so, great to tell stories about.
I love that. I think having, I suppose, like a sort of media company mindset that whenever we are writing any kind of content, like if we're writing a case study or a news article to go on our website, that every time it should pass through this filter of, is this newsworthy? Can this also be a press release at the same time? So it could be that there's one core piece of content that then may be able to be repurposed in a variety of ways. And one of those is as a press release. Yeah, definitely a big opportunity here for people, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Was there anything else that you wanted to add, Ellie, that we haven't already covered?
I think that's probably lots to take away for now, isn't it? I don't want to bombard people. But I mean, if your listeners are interested in more sort of regular tips about content, like press releases, but other content for marketing your business too, I have an email myself called Writer's Tips, which I send out on a monthly basis. So you can always sign up to my mailing list and get tips like this on a regular basis.
Super. Okay, well, do you want to remind people where they sign up for that now?
So you can sign up to my mailing list on my website, which is just www.ellieseniorcopywriting.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Okay. And Ellie, before I let you go, there's one last question that I'd like to ask you. I love to travel and to discover new places, and I was just wondering if you could tell me about one of your favourite places and what you love about it. So this could be somewhere near or far.
Well, I'm a mountain lover at heart, John, despite the fact that I live in Cambridgeshire in the Fens, where it's very, very flat. So, my husband and I have always, throughout our lives, spent many happy weeks in the mountains. We love going out to the Alps, whether it's hiking in the summer or skiing in the winter. And in recent years, with our kids in tow. So, it's a tough pick, but I think my favourite place that I love to go back to again and again is Austria. For me, I feel like somebody at some point took a pencil and drew a wiggly line around the most beautiful mountainscapes in Europe and just called it Austria. And that's a place that we just adore. The mountains are absolutely stunning. There's these enormous lakes as well that are great for, paddling on and swimming in the summer. We have a little camper van that we love to take out there for a couple of weeks most summers.
Oh, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Yeah, idyllic. I've been to Austria once, but it was more passing through while I was doing a trip around Central Europe. So I did get to go and see some of the scenery there and visited Salzburg.
Oh, yeah.
But I probably due a visit back, I would say, to explore a bit more of that country.
Yes, I'd recommend.
So if and when I do start planning that trip, I will let you know, and you can give me some tips.
Definitely. I'll give you a tour.
That sounds awesome. Thank you so much, Ellie. This has been really useful. I think the listeners are going to find this really beneficial. And I'm really grateful for you to come and be a guest on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, John. Thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed listening to lots of your guests over the month. So I'm very pleased to join their ranks.
Next time, I'll be sharing details of our new and exciting membership community. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Architecture Business Club. If you liked this episode, think other people might enjoy it, but just want to show your support for the show, then please leave a glowing 5-star review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It would mean so much to me and makes it easier for new listeners to discover the show. And if you haven't already done so, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another episode. If you want to connect with me, you can do that on most social media platforms. Just search for @Mr. John Clayton. The best place to connect with me online, though, is on LinkedIn. You can find a link to my profile in the show notes. Remember, running your architecture business doesn't have to be hard, and you don't need to do it alone. This is Architecture Business Club.